Coming up on show 695, Nikola reveal a 600-mile range truck named after an animal. Stick around, we'll tell you more. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening around the world. Welcome to EV News Daily. This is the show for Wednesday, 12th of February. Martyn Lee here, and I go through every EV story so you don't have to. Welcome to EV News Daily on location from a part of London called Borough. Recording this very late at night from the third floor of a hotel overlooking, well, a big traffic junction, really. It's just a reminder how noisy traffic is. And I can see a few cabs out there. They're all Priuses, a few Ubers, but otherwise, it's just so noisy in central London. There's a big event happening in London called Move 2020, so I'm in town for that. But apart from that, like the motorbikes are the worst, the scooters, but mostly just the general traffic noise. And it's like gone 11 o'clock at night now, and it's just so noisy. Anyway, the windows are open to get some fresh air in, so if you can hear the traffic in the background, that's why. But otherwise, I'll be quiet, because I don't know how thick the walls are of this hotel room, and I imagine somebody's trying to sleep somewhere. Hey, some new reviews for the podcast, and thank you very, very much to everyone that reviews this show. I do appreciate it very, very much. If you go to Apple Podcasts, oh yes, and the sirens. So many. You can tell that I don't live in the city anymore. We used to live in London, but moved out many years ago. And yeah, you can tell, can't you? I'm not a city boy anymore complaining about the noise. All right, let me move away from the window a little bit. Thank you very much to the new reviews that have hit Apple Podcasts. Hello to Mondo, who says the podcast is always well researched, takes many hours to script, record and post, he says, but all the most important news in 15 minutes. The only problem is my commute is more like 30. And hello to Cuddly in Australia, who says, I've been a subscriber before you got to 100 episodes. I have a background in renewable fuels since the late 90s, but EVs are the future going forwards. I'm impressed with the amount of EV infrastructure. Thank you for your reviews. If you are on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, as they call it these days, then please do feel free to leave a little star rating or a few words. Really, really helps grow the podcast. So lead story today, the US American electric vehicle startup and the South Korean automotive giants have come together. The US startup I'm talking about is Canoo, C-A-N-O-O, Canoo, and the South Korean giant, well, that's Hyundai. And when I saw the headline for this story, it was a fair assumption to make. It's a fair assumption that actually a small startup, a massive automaker, I thought the small company had licensed some tech from the big company. It turns out it's the opposite. Now, Hyundai and Kia are making some really, really good EVs. So it's not as if they're not coming from a place of having some good cars already. But listen to this. It's an engineering partnership to develop EVs together. Canoo and Hyundai are getting together to develop EVs based on Canoo's technology. Now, Canoo have this skateboard tech platform, which, you know, if you haven't heard this podcast many times before, we call it the skateboard because it's basically a flat battery pack with the wheels on all four corners. It's designing an EV from the ground up, not retrofitting your designs to modify a fossil car into an EV. So that's what we talk about. And so Hyundai have gone to the small company and using their technology for upcoming Kias and Hyundais. It says Electrive. Canoo has made waves with their EVs designed on a scalable platform for which they opened a wait list. The company has put particular attention into their functional integration, which they say reduces the skateboard size and the weight and the number of parts, which ultimately provides more interior cabin space and a more cost-effective EV offering, they say. It's flexible in design, and it's going to allow Hyundai and their kind of cousin company Kia to develop a large series of EVs and give them a leg up or several legs up the ladder all at once. Wow, massive story, huge news today that they are having to look elsewhere, look outside of the four walls of their own offices to make a move in EVs. Because we look at the Kona, the e-Niro, the Soul, all really great. When you look at them compared to most other EV makers, they've got it going on. But they've looked for some help elsewhere. The other big story today is Nikola Motors unveiling a new electric truck. And they've called it the Badger. And then I saw some reaction today where they were trying to justify or compare it to the Honey Badger, which is a really fierce, small animal that I think the stat is something like pound for pound the most dangerous animal in the world because it's a small badger but fights fiercely. Yet, you've still called your truck the Badger. In the world of trucks, I'm not sure how many bragging rights you get for driving the Badger. It's in the early stages of development, but they're working on battery electric versions and a hydrogen version as well. The Badger, I can't get used to calling it that. The Badger will hit the market with a 600-mile range, 0 to 62.9 seconds, says Kyle at Clean Technica. The Badger is the result of years of work by Nikola, according to the CEO Trevor Milton, and it's now ready for them to talk about. The battery is massive, 160 kilowatt hours in the Badger, with a 15 kilowatt power export for truck owners to power their workday, enough juice to run job lights, tools, compressors, and actually if you're away at the weekend, I imagine you can use some utility there for your weekend getaways in your truck. Well, another, which on any other day, this would have been the lead story, another huge story. If you needed more proof that Tesla is going to make their own battery cells, and a reminder they've been reliant on Panasonic up until now, recently in the last couple of weeks announcing deals with LG Chem, and who was the other one as well? Goodness, I forget. I don't want to make it up and then get it wrong. We've now learned that Tesla is building a pilot, it's a pilot battery cell manufacturing line at their Fremont plant. CATL, there we go. See, my brain does work, but just very, very slowly this late at night. The CATL is who they're also working with for the Chinese-made Model 3s. However, in Fremont, Tesla will design their own equipment to produce batteries and cells, says Electrek. If you needed more proof that Tesla is going to make its own cells, now we know they're building the pilot plant in Fremont. So we'll keep an eye on that. Job listings show plans for Tesla to produce their own battery cells in Europe as well at Gigafactory Berlin. Moving on, and Eon, the energy company Eon, otherwise better known as selling you your electricity, and Volkswagen are giving a joint partnership, new impetus, with a new ultra-fast charging station that is going to be presented in Essen. And what they've done is they've made a fast charger. Well, that's nothing really new. Plenty of 150 kilowatt and 350 kilowatt HPCs out in the wild over the last 12 months. But theirs is inclusive or integrated with a battery at significantly lower cost than if they had to upgrade the mains connection to get those kind of speeds. So by putting a battery with, and Tesla's talked about this for a long time, but VW have done it with Eon, they're putting a battery and a high-powered charger together, which means that you can dump a ton of juice stored in the battery quickly into your car and then slowly recharge the integrated battery and the charger. Now, all the chargers are going to be connected permanently to the mains from a 16 amp to a 63 amp connection, depending on where it'll be used. Eon will operate the rapid chargers with green electricity. You can update them, maintain them remotely, look after billing and stuff because they're all connected and online and things like that. And fantastic way of getting chargers into places where the idea of upgrading the mains grid connection, maybe even rural areas, but also the idea of just, because sometimes even just extending some of these high-powered lines across a car park, right? It's not the digging up the concrete that is the money. It's the electrical work. The groundworks is sometimes the cheap in comparison bit than laying the cables. So the use of batteries, a really, really smart use of technology. Well, following in Škoda's footsteps, SEAT, the Spanish bit of VW, has officially announced that it will launch its own plug-in hybrid hot hatch and an estate version, or wagon, versions of the recently unveiled Leon family car, called the Cupra. It's not the SEAT Leon anymore. It's the Cupra Leon. That's a change. That's new. And it's going to be shown at a launch event on February 20th in about a week's time and then unveiled to the public at Geneva. It says inside EVs. This particular model is not only the first performance plug-in from SEAT, but it's the first Leon not to be branded with the Seat badge. It's going to be the Cupra badge. Powertrain, if you're interested, powertrain is identical to the Skoda Octavia RS that I told you about recently. The plug-in version of that is a 1.4-litre engine, 4-cylinder engine, turbocharged, and then an electric motor to give you the instant oomph, and a 13 kilowatt-hour battery. Well, major international companies are charging ahead on electric vehicles to address the climate crisis, to tackle air pollution, and to meet growing customer expectations. But they are increasingly confronted with a lack of vehicle supply, says the Climate Group. They're a global non-profit. According to the website smartenergy.com, 5 more companies just joined the EV100 group today. In the UK, France, US and Denmark, the UK's Lloyds Banking Group will convert their own fleets of 12,000 vehicles to EVs and install 83 charging sites at relevant locations for staff and customers. Zenith, the independent fleet management company and leasing company, will electrify, I noticed that they say electrify, not pure EV, but electrify all of the 48,000 vehicles in their own fleet. So in this one story, 60,000 vehicles being electrified. Hopefully what they mean by electrified is coming with a plug socket, because as long as it has a plug, even if it's a hybrid, that's okay. Lots of people want those and need those. It hasn't got to be full battery electric. I'd love it to be, but it hasn't got to be. Hybrids have a place, just as long as they have a plug socket on, yeah. Okay, moving on. Nissan has worked with sound engineers to create a lullaby, or rather a series of lullabies, based on the sound of internal combustion engines. You really couldn't make some things up. Have Nissan got nothing better to do with all of their piles of money, by the sounds of it? No. They've got the time to employ sound engineers to create pieces of music, about 3 minutes long. I've had a listen to them. I would play them to you now, but they're quite ambient, and I'm afraid if you're listening to this while you commute and drive, it might send you off to sleep. So I won't play any of them now, but they're kind of, the typical sort of wishy-washy ambient stuff that you can get to help you fall off to sleep. But Nissan have said their sound engineers have modelled them on the internal combustion engine. You see, Nissan say, electric cars have a problem. They're quiet. And particularly, says Tech Radar, the resulting tracks, which they've called Nissan Leaf Dream Drive, is available right now. Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. If you search Dream Drive, you'll find it. Nissan have justified it by saying that parents often take their kids out in the car at bedtime to make them fall off to sleep. And if you've got a nice fossil gobbling car, they say, it's great news because your kids fall asleep straight away, but in an EV it's too quiet. There's no low and mid frequencies to have the soothing effect, so they have made some pieces of music that model combustion cars. To be honest with you, I had to listen to them. I can't hear it myself. They're perfectly nice. They're just like any other kind of ambient-y, fancy club music. Anyway, moving on. Well, let's talk about Gigafactory 4, or as Elon wants it called these days, Giga Berlin. Tesla has submitted the expected application for subsidies to the state of Brandenburg for the construction of Giga Berlin. Federal Minister for Economic Affairs Peter Altmaier now has certain criteria, he says, for federal subsidies, says Laura at Electrive. On the federal level, the Minister of Economic Affairs has promised Tesla some state subsidies to help build Giga Berlin, concerning building battery cells in Germany as well, although that's coming at a later stage. Telling the newspaper Welt am Sonntag, companies that meet certain requirements regarding sustainability and performance of batteries will receive government support. I'm sure that was all part of what swung it in the favour of that country and that area. Many countries in Europe would have been good. There's LG have a big battery facility in Poland. I'm sure many countries would have thrown subsidies at, not all of them, I suppose. Many of them might not be convinced about EVs, but some countries and areas would have thrown subsidies and incentives, financial incentives at Elon Musk, and he chose, or Tesla and the team chose Berlin for many reasons, and I'm sure that is all part of the mix. So, let's finish off by talking about batteries. The Website Electrek today says that on a recent trip to Detroit, they caught up with Tim Grew. Now, Tim Grew is GM's Director of Battery Cell Engineering. Man, that's I bet a fascinating job. And one of the quotes that I picked out was curious to me. He said this, and I quote, "The costs are coming down dramatically. We're not anywhere close to the bottom. When we started making EVs, we didn't have field data, so we were conservative with batteries. This active material inside the cell was number one, but you still have to work on everything else." End quote. And him saying there that we are nowhere near the bottom of the price curve with batteries going in EVs. Using very, very rough numbers, over the last 10 years, it's gone from $1,000 per kilowatt hour to just over $100 per kilowatt hour at pack level. And many people, some of them EV detractors, but many people online saying, look, that big change has happened now, and then we're not going to see those prices go down anymore for batteries in cars. And here's GM's main man on the subject saying that the costs are still coming down dramatically and nowhere near the close. We're close to the bottom. And that is good news, because it gives you two options, doesn't it? It gives you two options. You can either put a bigger battery in the car, coming right back to the beginning of the podcast and the Nikola Badger. Terrible name. The Badger with a 160 kilowatt hour battery, which, you know, a few years ago would have been 100 kilowatts, but the Badger has 160. So you can either go big battery for what would have been the same money all those years ago, or, and I think this is more interesting, why do we need cars that do 600 miles with 160 kilowatt hour batteries? They don't all have to be long-range EVs. I think as we are reinventing mobility, we're reinventing transport, we're reinventing what we need to get our lives done. And in some cases that might not be a car at all, by the way. But in many cases, what's wrong with an EV with a small battery? Because it's lightweight. As long as it charges quickly, that's the thing, right? As long as you can get a battery to take juice quickly. So if you have got to do the occasional couple of times a year, see friends and family over the holiday period, as long as you can know that there's enough, A, there's enough chargers, and B, that I stop for 20 minutes and it's going to charge quickly, and I don't mind stopping, right? Comfort breaks and all that kind of stuff. Grab a coffee. Why do we need more than 40, 50, 60 kilowatt hours? Because stay small but reduce the cost, and that is going to be the key. Because as much as I didn't pay a huge amount of money for my EV, and maybe if you have an EV and, you know, it's an expensive one or a cheaper one, you must admit still it is a privilege to own an EV. They're not knocking around cheap on used sites like myev.com for a few thousand. So the quicker we can bring down the costs of EV, that's another big barrier knocked down for those that don't have a lot of money to spend on their personal transport. So I'm more excited about that side of it as well, and just reducing the costs. Okay, right, question of the week this week. It's been popular already, only a couple of days in. You got till Sunday to get your answer in. I'll read your reply out on Sunday's show, the myev.com question of the week. So I'm thinking of driving to Italy in a couple of months' time, when I realised, actually, if it means skirting the Alps, maybe I won't do it too soon, because it'll be very cold. But maybe we have friends that live north of Pisa, and wouldn't it be nice to do a bit of a road trip? 1,028 miles according to Google Maps, 17 hours according to Google Maps, Channel Tunnel to France, straight down and into northern Italy. I also realised that over the next couple of weeks, it is the pre-season testing for Formula 1. Now, it's a bit late for me to go to the first one, but I do love my Formula 1. So, whilst Formula 1 has a bit of a carbon issue in terms of flying all those big motorhomes around the world and all the hundreds of people, apart from, of course, the fuel that you burn while you're racing, wouldn't it be an interesting thing to do to drive an EV down so that I could watch some Formula 1? That's in Barcelona, Circuit de Catalunya, Barcelona, and actually that's about 1,000 miles as well, but rather than going down through France and going right a bit, you go left a bit. So, and down to the top of France rather than the top of Italy. Both of those about 1,000 miles. And actually, Barcelona will be a couple of weeks' time. So, if I do it, and I'm undecided, what's the longest EV road trip you've done? Or if you don't own an EV yet, what's the longest EV road trip you would do? Let me know. Email me, hello@evnewsdaily.com, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube show. Well, thank you to 231 patrons of the show. Got 2 more names to read out tomorrow. Thank you very much to my new patrons. Give your name check tomorrow and add you to the list at the bottom of the show notes as well. If you are thinking about doing that, maybe for a month or two, it's just basically the price of what would be a posh coffee or two. You get to support this show. All the various costs get paid for by Patreon. patreon.com/evnewsdaily. And actually, it does help me grow the show. I'm able to be in London tonight and stay in this hotel, thanks to Patreon, in case you were wondering. It's 83 of your generously donated pounds spent on the hotel, the Ritz. This is not. However, that £83 is things like the Patreon. I don't do this very often, but when there's money left over in Patreon, I'm able to do that and go along to an event like tomorrow, meet fascinating people, record Saturday specials to bring you those programs over coming weeks. That's what I'm doing tomorrow morning before lunchtime. Right. If you want to get any of the previous shows, they're in the archive, 694 of those. If you can leave a review like the people you heard at the start of the show, please do. Have a wonderful day. Catch you tomorrow, and remember, there is no such thing as a self-charging hybrid.